March 6, 1943, General George S. Patton walked through the doors of U.S. the Second Corps' headquarters in North Africa, and dozens of military careers were about to end. Officers wandered the hallways like ghost men who already knew their failure was written all over their faces. You could feel defeat hanging in the air like smoke, and then Patton showed up, shining helmet, pearl-handled pistols on his hips, and a look in his eyes that made everyone nervous. Within 24 hours, he'd fired multiple officers. Within a week, dozens more were gone. Within 10 days, the Second Corps wouldn't even look like the same army. Here's why Patton was there. American forces had just experienced their most humiliating defeat in North Africa. The bloodiest weak U.S. troops had seen in the entire war. An entire division had been crushed. Pictures of American soldiers surrendering were being shown around the world. Eisenhower gave Patton one job: fix this mess. Restore discipline. Bring back the fighting spirit of an army that had been destroyed at Kasserine Pass. What happened next was one of the most brutal leadership shakeups the military had ever witnessed. Patton fired officers for being cowards, for being incompetent, for standing in the wrong spot, even for not wearing their helmets correctly. He turned a broken, defeated corps into a deadly fighting machine in just 10 days. And he did it by making every single officer afraid they'd be the next one sent home in shame. This is how Patton rescued the American army in North Africa, by ending the careers of dozens of officers who failed not because they lacked courage, but because they simply weren't prepared. February 14, 1943, German commander Erwin Rommel launched Operation Fruling Wind, hitting American positions at Sidi Bou Said in Tunisia hard. American troops had only been in North Africa 3 months. Most had never seen real combat. Their officers had never led men under actual fire, and they were up against hardened German veterans who'd been fighting in the desert for 2 years. By February 15th, it was a disaster. Young American soldiers from places like Kansas and Ohio, kids who'd been told they were unstoppable, were now throwing away their rifles just to run faster. The Germans kept pushing. On February 19th, Rommel drove his Panzer Division straight through Kasserine Pass within hours. The entire defense fell apart. Major General Lloyd Fredendall was running the Second Corps from a headquarters 70 miles away from the actual fighting. When the Germans attacked, Fredendall couldn't even organize a response. He had no idea where his own troops were. He pointed fingers at his subordinates for disasters he'd caused himself. By February 24th, when the smoke cleared, American forces had lost over 6,000 men. The 168th Infantry Regiment alone lost 2,000 soldiers. The 1st Armored Division lost 183 tanks. Hundreds of Americans were captured and filmed by German propaganda crews. British commanders started questioning whether Americans could even fight. German commanders decided Americans were badly led and easy to beat. Something needed to change, right now. Eisenhower knew exactly who to call. George S. Patton Jr. was 57 years old in March 1943. He commanded tanks in World War I and written training manuals for tank warfare. Everyone in the Army knew him as a brilliant trainer and a hard-as-nails disciplinarian. He demanded perfection, zero excuses. He believed discipline under fire was what separated winning armies from losing ones. Patton didn't think American soldiers were worse than Germans. They were just poorly led and poorly trained. Give them proper leadership and aggressive tactics, and Americans would dominate every time. Eisenhower had known Patton for decades. He knew Patton could train troops like nobody else and restore their confidence. But Patton was also ruthless with officers he thought were useless. He'd fire commanders without blinking. And that ruthlessness was exactly what the Second Corps needed right now. On March 6, 1943, Eisenhower fired Fredendall and put Patton in charge of the Second Corps. Patton's orders were crystal clear: fix this. Make them fight. Do it fast. Patton's first order came within hours of arriving. Every soldier in the Second Corps would wear their helmet and full combat gear at all times, no exceptions. The first officer he fired was sitting at a desk without his helmet. The man didn't even get a chance to stand up. Patton told him to pack his stuff and report to the rear immediately. 20 years of service ended in one sentence: Officers caught without helmets were fired on the spot. Within 24 hours, everyone at the 2nd Corps headquarters looked ready for combat inspection. Patton's second order was about saluting. Every soldier would salute every officer. Military courtesy would be strictly enforced. That night, Patton met with his top commanders. He made one thing clear: American soldiers hadn't failed at Kasserine, American leadership had failed them. March 7, 1943. Patton drove out to the forward positions of the 2nd Corps. He wanted to see the tactical situation himself and judge how officers were performing. At the 1st Battalion headquarters, the commanding officer wasn't even there. He was back at division headquarters. His second-in-command didn't know exactly where all the battalion's companies were. Patton fired the battalion commander immediately. He promoted the second-in-command and told him if he didn't know his positions by tomorrow, he'd be gone too. At the next position, Patton found a company commander who'd set up his command post 500 yards behind his forward troops. The officer explained he needed to be where he could coordinate communications. Patton told him a company commander belongs with his lead troops, not behind them. If you can't see what your men are seeing, you can't lead them effectively. The officer was fired and sent to the rear. Over the next 3 days, Patton visited dozens of positions. He fired officers who weren't at the front. He fired officers whose defensive positions were a mess. He fired officers who couldn't answer basic questions about their tactical situation. Patton also started evaluating his division and regimental commanders. He'd watch them closely during upcoming operations. Those who performed well would get promoted. Those who failed would be fired. Major General Orlando Ward of the 1st Armored Division was one of those being watched closely. The message shot through the 2nd Corps like electricity. Get to the front, know your positions. Be ready to answer the general's questions or you're finished. Every time anyone heard a Jeep engine in the distance, officers tensed up. They knew Patton was coming. They knew there wouldn't be second chances. You were either a real leader or you were going home. The impact on morale was complicated. Some officers were terrified. Others felt energized. Soldiers in the ranks saw that leadership was finally being held accountable for the Kasserine disaster. The army was learning a brutal lesson. Defeat had consequences. Poor leadership had consequences. And Patton was making sure everyone felt those consequences personally. But Patton didn't just fire people. He implemented immediate tactical training to fix the problems that caused the Kasserine defeat. American tank tactics had been defensive. Patton changed that. Tanks would be used for aggressive movement and rapid exploitation. Artillery coordination had been chaotic at Kasserine. Patton demanded fire missions be delivered within minutes, not hours. Infantry and tank coordination was practiced daily. American infantry had panicked when German tanks appeared at Kasserine because they didn't know how to fight alongside their own armor units. Patton emphasized speed and aggression. American forces would not sit in defensive positions waiting to get attacked. They would attack first, attack hard, and keep attacking. That opportunity came faster than anyone expected. Eisenhower approved Patton's request to launch an offensive toward the town of Guettar. The attack was set for March 17, 1943. That gave Patton exactly 11 days from taking command to launching an offensive. Not every officer got fired. Patton identified subordinates who understood combat leadership and gave them bigger responsibilities. Major General Omar Bradley had been sent to North Africa by Eisenhower as an observer during the Kasserine battle. Bradley's job was to assess the situation and report back on command performance. His observations were sharp and accurate. Eisenhower trusted Bradley's judgment completely. After Kasserine, Bradley had recommended Patton as the right man to fix the 2nd Corps. Now, Patton was making Bradley his deputy commander. Bradley would handle much of the staff work while Patton focused on tactics and leadership. It was an effective partnership that would last through the rest of the war. Several battalion and regimental commanders who'd fought well during Kasserine were identified for key positions. Officers who'd maintained discipline under pressure. Leaders who'd kept their troops fighting even when everything was falling apart. These officers became Patton's core team. He placed them in key positions throughout the 2nd Corps. They understood what he expected. They could train other officers in aggressive tactics, They'd already proven themselves in combat. Patton's personnel decisions were brutal, but not random. He wasn't firing officers for no reason. He was removing officers who couldn't perform and promoting officers who could. The junior officers and NCOs of the Second Corps noticed this pattern immediately. Competence was rewarded. Failure was punished. If you fought well and led effectively, Patton would promote you. If you failed to lead or showed cowardice, you were done. This created exactly the culture Patton wanted. Officers competed to prove themselves. Nobody wanted to be the next one relieved. Everyone wanted to be recognized as one of the aggressive leaders Patton valued. By March 15th, Patton had reshaped the Second Corps' command structure. Corps headquarters staff had been replaced. Battalion and regimental commanders were being evaluated. But changing people was only half the battle. Patton still had to change how these men thought about themselves. The most important change Patton created wasn't tactical, it was mental. American soldiers stopped thinking of themselves as defeated and started thinking of themselves as dangerous. Patton's leadership style was deliberately dramatic. He gave profane speeches. He projected absolute confidence that American forces were superior to any enemy. Soldiers who'd been depressed and uncertain after Kasserine responded to this energy. Patton didn't make excuses for the defeat. He didn't baby them. He told them they were going to win, and he expected them to prove it. The nightly patrols and aggressive posture created momentum. American forces stopped reacting to German moves and started initiating contact. Small victories and patrol actions built confidence. German forces noticed the change. Intelligence reports from March 1943 describe American forces as more aggressive and better coordinated than in February. German commanders were surprised by how quickly the Americans had improved. This was exactly what Patton intended. He wasn't just rebuilding two corps tactically. He was rebuilding it mentally. American soldiers needed to believe they could beat the Germans who had destroyed them. The harsh discipline and constant inspections served this purpose. Soldiers who looked sharp felt sharp. Units that moved with precision felt professional. The external signs of military competence created internal confidence. British observers were skeptical. They thought Patton's emphasis on appearance and regulations was shallow showmanship. They were about to be proven wrong. March 17, 1943, 5:30 a.m., American artillery opened fire on German positions near Guettar. The barrage lasted 30 minutes. Then American infantry and armor attacked. The 1st Infantry Division led the assault. These were the same troops who'd been humiliated at Kasserine. Now they were attacking with the tactics Patton had drilled into them. By noon, American forces had advanced 6 miles and captured Guettar. First objective achieved ahead of schedule. On March 23rd, German forces counterattacked. This was the real test. Would the Second Corps break like a Kasserine or would it hold? German panzer forces attacked head-on. American artillery destroyed the first wave of tanks. American anti-tank guns engaged at close range. American infantry held their ground instead of running. The German attack was stopped cold. Over 30 German tanks were destroyed. The counterattack had failed completely. American forces had proven they could fight defensive battles against German armor. The psychological scars of Kasserine were beginning to heal. By April 7th, American forces had advanced over 50 miles. They'd proven that American soldiers could fight effectively against the Wehrmacht. Guettar wasn't the biggest battle of the North African campaign, but it was the most important for American forces. It validated Patton's brutal leadership methods. Dozens of officers had their careers destroyed by Patton's purge. Most were Corps headquarters staff officers and battalion-level field commanders, a few regimental commanders. Some were sent back to the United States and assigned to training commands or staff positions. Their combat leadership careers were over. Some of these officers were legitimately incompetent. They'd failed under pressure, they'd made terrible decisions. They deserved to be removed from combat command. But others were competent administrators who just weren't built for frontline combat leadership. Patton didn't care about the difference. Combat command required aggressive leadership. Anyone who couldn't provide it was removed. The personal cost was devastating. Many were decent, patriotic Americans who'd given everything to the service. They packed their belongings in the middle of the night and headed home to face a lifetime of what-if questions. The Army handled these firings quietly. No formal charges were filed. Officers were simply reassigned with vague explanations. This protected the institution while removing inadequate leaders. It was cold and efficient. It was also brutal for the officers involved. The officers who survived understood the lesson. Leadership under fire was unforgiving. Mistakes had consequences. Performance mattered more than intentions. This culture lasted throughout the war. American forces developed a reputation for firing commanders quickly when they failed to perform. Even senior officers like Orlando Ward, relieved April 5th, learned that rank didn't protect you. Whether this approach was fair to individual officers is debatable. Whether it created a more effective army is not. Patton commanded the 2nd Corps for only 40 days. On April 15, 1943, he was reassigned to command 1st Armored Corps in preparation for the invasion of Sicily. Omar Bradley was promoted to command the 2nd Corps. He maintained Patton's standards for discipline and aggressive tactics. The culture Patton created persisted. The 2nd Corps would go on to fight successfully in Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy. The divisions that had been crushed at Kasserine became veteran units with excellent combat records. Patton himself would command the 7th Army in Sicily and later the 3rd Army in France. He would become the most celebrated American ground commander of World War II, but the North African purge remained controversial. Some officers admired Patton's ruthless accountability. Others believed he'd destroyed careers unnecessarily. By May 1943, the North African campaign was over. American forces had proven they could fight effectively against the Wehrmacht. The officers Patton promoted went on to distinguished careers. The officers he fired disappeared from military history. The soldiers of the 2nd Corps who'd been defeated at Kasserine went on to storm beaches in Sicily and Italy. They became veteran units with excellent combat records. Patton's purge taught the American Army lessons that shaped military doctrine for decades. Leadership accountability became a core principle. The Army developed systems for rapid relief of commanders who failed to perform. The British operated differently. Failed commanders were reassigned rather than removed. The American approach created a more adaptable army. Patton himself would eventually be removed from command in 1945 for his outspoken political statements. The system he helped create was eventually used against him. The numbers tell the story clearly. At Kasserine Pass, the 2nd Corps was destroyed. At Guettar, the 2nd Corps defeated German counterattacks. The difference was leadership. Patton saved the army by breaking its heart. He sacrificed the careers of the few to save the lives of the many. And when the 2nd Corps attacked at Guettar, those soldiers were fighting because he had finally made them believe they were worth fighting for.